All right, welcome to Seminar 4 from Frontier Incubator's Scaling and Replicating Programs series. This is Sam from the Social Enterprise Academy, joined by Carlos from Global Entrepreneurship Network and a host of folks from the cohorts. So welcome along. This is the fourth seminar and fits with webinar 4 and all the reading materials and exercises that are on the Slack group, hashtag scaling-programs. And it fits here as part of the overall series based on the last 4 webinars and with 1 to go. But today we're talking about business development, and it's about pace, which might be lightning fast or it might be nice and slow, but whichever way, hopefully we can have a good discussion and see what we can all come up with and support each other on. So welcome everybody to today's session. First of all, if we could just quickly go around and introduce ourselves just briefly and what it is around the topic of market development, business development from this webinar that we might be interested in discussing today. Who'd like to start? Carlos, you look eager. Maybe you'd like to.
Okay.
Carlos, yeah.
My name's Carlos Iniguez, Global Entrepreneurship Network. I'm a director at Gen Accelerates, where we are developing and executing plug-and-play solutions for ecosystem building and stakeholders within those ecosystems to deliver tailored education programs, content, and training to anybody that's looking to literally do what this topic is asking, which is to replicate and scale across nations and regions. One topic that I would be particularly interested in is just to do a quick follow-up as to understanding what some of our folks here on the call are interested in doing with regards to their own scaling and replication plans, where they're at with it, and I guess in my perspective here, providing my insights and piggybacking off everything that Sam says because he's that awesome.
Yeah. Nice guy. Very good. Biggest fan. Who'd like to go next? Maybe Junaid, you good to go?
Sure. Yeah. So hi, I'm Junaid. Currently working on a serendipity venture, which is a program under development. So not something that's rolled out, but we are working in the local experience space in the verticals of hospitality, food, fashion. And we have social impact as part of a core value. And yeah, so we are in the phase we're developing it, and it's going to be based out of Colombo, Sri Lanka as of now. And what I'm curious to know more about was at one point in the presentation, I remember the one that was shared on YouTube, there was a discussion about the relative, as an example, Carlos pointed out the relative merit of, a co-working space versus the business model kind of alignment, and why one client made sense and not made someone else to make the sense. And that particular example made sense because, the co-working space, physical space versus a business model is more important. But I was wondering if there could be some more similar examples shared. So one can kind of make like a choice, like a decision matrix kind of a thing that, in order of priority, what is in your experience, like, what is a good mix and match? What is that kind of a slider across the spectrum? So that was one thing. Yeah.
Nice. Cool. Mix and matching business models. Good one. Agnia, Farah? Comment on, let me get it. So from Farah, working at market research consulting firm in Dhaka, excited for the webinar because I want to learn more about scaling properly a process which maximizes an organization's resources. Okay, great, nice one. So there's something there around maximizing resource, perhaps with link to pace and market development. We're also going to be talking about resources in the next webinar as well. So that's really good. good timing for us. So this one and the next one will be perfect for discussing that. So we can talk about resourcing that process of scaling and developing markets. Great. And Agnia, how are you guys getting on at CIAP? You've got interesting business development and chosen scaling pathway. Yeah, what are you interested in talking about?
I've watched the webinar for the Pace to Scale, and yeah, actually I'm interested in, I want to talk about more about the how to explore the sales tactics and how to prioritize, so we can do more planning, and also how we can enter the new ecosystem and the process of entering new markets, because actually in Indonesia there are lots of cities with different types of geography, and also different kind of customer segments, and that's the most challenges part, that we have to differentiate our the first after we organize the bootcamp in Solo. I realized that we have to really develop our curriculum to be more localized, and that's the hardest part, because there is a huge gap of knowledge between the cities like big cities like Jakarta and other cities like in Solo and Bandung. So that's if we want to define and design our core, it is going to be really hard for us to have a standardized curriculum, and that's our challenge currently. And also because the human resource is also one of our challenge, because to have a good facilitator, we have to train them well, and because we want to find the local facilitator or local partners to help us to develop our program to other cities. Yeah, that's another part of that's another challenge that we have to really find a solution. So that's two topics that I am interested in. Thanks.
Yeah, perfect. Really good. Thank you, G. Nice one. Excellent. Because yours is a licensing model, isn't it? You're still thinking about that. That's the method of scaling. Yeah, brilliant. Great. Okay, well, I reckon. How about we go in that order, that same order actually? Then let's talk about business model mixing first off, and then talking maybe a little bit about that market entry that both Farah and Agnia were interested in, and the blend of resources. If that's all right with everybody. So to Junaid's question first around mixing business models. I know that it's maybe worth also mentioning on the Frontier Incubator's website and YouTube channels the webinars from spring led by Keith and with TDI around financial sustainability. They touch on some of the business model mixing as well, I think in some of the earlier webinars, 1 and 2. So yeah, maybe worth scooting back through those on that topic as well. But Carlos, did you want to pick up on that one first in terms of the what Junaid was raising there about mixing co-working, or any other examples that you'd like to add? I can add some as well, but yeah, do you want to pick up on that?
Sorry, I was muted as I was starting to enthusiastically try to jump in here. So just to make sure that I get the question right and framed properly, it's that there is an interest in the organization mixing and matching some of these business models for, or finding a partner that will potentially be able to take a couple.
So I will so put the question out again, just to clarify. So in the presentation, you kind of talked about one example you quoted, which was that one partner had a good physical space, but there was no alignment in terms of the business model. And the other example was the flip of that. Mm-hmm. So that was a good example, kind of just to get a slight hang of, okay, this makes more sense versus in terms of order of priority, because if you don't align on the business or the core values, then physical structures can be made or will develop in time, but that core value might be different, right? That was a good insight. So I was wondering, if there could be other examples that could perhaps be shared in terms of assessing the relative value for whoever is considering scaling, that okay, in order of priority, the first off, the core value alignment, for instance, needs to be there, and in a descending priority order, like what are the things that matter less and less. Yeah. So that was just more of a small, quick snapshot kind of a query.
Yeah, sure. So, I mean, I think the first thing that I always think would be best, and probably more when I've talked about these subjects with our clients as well, if we know our brand first and foremost, and really like what our position is in the market, it will help us then, define out, again, when we prioritize, what exactly are we looking for. Now, let's say, for example, we do need, and actually you might have a couple of number ones, right? In what you had reference to, you had said that there was a couple of key industry verticals, right, that you're currently working in at Serendipity. And as a result, that actually, I could see how that actually makes more of a challenge around trying to find one person that fits all, because, or I'm sorry, one organization that fits all, because you're hitting maybe 3 or 4 different true segments, Now, I think one of the things that you could probably do here that could be interesting is, if you're going to stagger the rollout, right, of how you're going to be targeting these segments first, understanding how we're going to be servicing our entrepreneurs would be the first best step, right? If you're looking to do a traditional incubation model, for example, you might potentially de-emphasize something like curriculum and a real program in favor of maybe a lot more one-on-one, finding a particular partner that has a lot more like one-on-one mentorship experience, or that is focusing on, maybe like a baseline, sort of consultation to go from like an early stage, type venture to something that's like pre-scale. But instead of taking like an education route, you're looking a little bit more towards a one-on-one interaction. That might be one particular area where you could find not necessarily a physical space, but an organization that has a lot of industry experts, where, as you work in partnership to be able to leverage that organization, again, what's the win-win to be able to bring them together? I think that could be something that might help out. If physical space was also required, when there was a model that we were working on, and I mean, I can't go into too much detail about how it's working because it's still a project that is in flux, but we had worked with something which was essentially saying that organization X was going to be considered a ecosystem connector, and being the connective tissue of the ecosystem means a lot of different things to a lot of different people. But I thought that probably one of the most clever ways to look at it was basically kind of looking at how airline partnerships work, sort of like a Star Alliance, type of thing, where every organization brings something to the table and you're the curator, along with like a very core area of like expertise where that you add the best value. But by becoming a curator, and if you can position yourself in that particular way as a leader in that space, you can potentially set quality control standards for any one of the services that you're looking to bring in, right? And the value that you bring in that particular type of structure. And I mean, I hope I'm not rambling here, Sam. Like,
no, you are spot on with a lot of things.
I don't know how much time.
Some of the ways you're already kind of moving across
Yeah.
on that serendipity front. Yeah, so it's a lot of things are in that kind of alignment. But yeah, so not rambling at all.
Yeah. Okay. Cool.
I'm taking notes.
If you're doing something like setting quality control standards, right, and you're saying that that's your threshold for entry, right? You're basically creating like a membership club, you know, and almost, you know, like if you were signing up for, you know, like some of these organizations that are providing perks and benefits, you know, at discounted rates or whatever, you're basically curating a network of partners. That's when you give someone the suitcase, they unlock the suitcase and everything's packed up for them. You want your space? Here's the preferred partner for the space. You know, if you want, you know, like a particular type of training program or certification system, here is the buffet of partners that you get. And it's about creating all of those systems, you know, and if that gets set, right, whenever you're going in to add a new partner, right, you have a structure where they can even potentially pay in to get diligenced, to get the certification or whatever that standard may be, so that they can, you know, be a part of that network, enjoy, you know, the pipeline to customers that will be intaking, you know, whatever it is that they're providing. But that it's a longer term play, but it allows you to also, again, scale out and say, what are your priorities first? And then start finding partners in those particular areas where you could start setting standards. You know, you write the standards, you force, you know, sort of the compliance to those standards. And, you know, I mean, what does compliance look like? Again, I think you would be able to define that, but that's something that you can jointly work on with them, so that you can even in that way address maybe some key needs that they have in their business models, which are kind of toss-ups or unknowns, you know, where we say, okay, let's clean yours up too. You know, we're defining ours and cleaning yours up. I'm not going to say that it's like a perfect plan, because I think when you have limited resources, again, to be able to jump into something like this, I think it requires you guys really sort of fully mastering what it is you're going to bring to the table first before you can go speak to others. But I think that that's a very clever way of being able to position yourself at the center and then start taking the best from everybody. Now, specifically on the point of space, because I know this is one that gets tossed around a lot. By virtue of the fact that they have space, we also have to know who they're attracting into the space, right? So, you know, one of the perceptions that we get a lot, especially like with anywhere that doesn't have a WeWork, you know, one of the issues that starts to come up is, you know, this space is for segment X. This is the millennial space. This is the one where the artists and the creatives go to. This is the one that really focuses on social enterprise. You know, this is the one that does this, that, and the other. So if you're not going into one of the more like corporatized co-working spaces like a WeWork, where, you know, the community is definitely focused around literally just anybody that wants to pay. Being able to find, again, either the right partner that already has a physical infrastructure that's able to take care of those types of entrepreneurs and that has programs and everything around it, is probably the best way to do it. I would be wary of, you know, potentially trying to force fits where sometimes they shouldn't, just because of what brand perception becomes later. You know, if an entrepreneur will potentially feel uncomfortable, you know, being in a particular space because they, you know, they say, oh, this is just for service people, you know, like we're consultants and accountants and this, that, and the other, and they need other things. You know, as good as that partner may be, or as good as the rates may be, it's not the right fit, you know? And then you potentially start turning participants in your programs or your offerings because it feels unfriendly, you know?
Yeah.
So
kind of goes into the whole, you know, your vibe attracts your tribe kind of situation, right? So,
yeah, totally. Yeah. I mean, I wish that wasn't the case, but I think, you know, that does become definitely an issue. And if you're working in the developing world, you know, I think the gap that starts to come up a lot is the SME versus startups crowds. You know, that is going to be a big one that I think we're starting to wrangle with as well in some of our markets. And the only answer that I can give you there is it's still a work in progress. I don't think that anything is necessarily like a complete lockdown solution. I guess it's whatever in the case looks and fits in the context is probably the best route to go with. But I would definitely, before picking preferred partners or saying that this is going to be the space, depending on who your crowd is, look at who the SMEs could potentially be and would they fit in that location.
Yeah.
Or
Nice.
do you need an SME space as well?
Yeah. And just to flag up, so Farah's there violently agreeing with Carlos on looking for fit with anything, resources, team, physical space, really important in scaling up. Needs to be emphasized more. So I think that point about fit, absolutely right. And if I can jump in as well, I think back on the original question as well around business model mixing, you get this blend of co-working, and I know that Keith was pretty strong on that's a different business. So if you're running an accelerator, be understanding this, it's a different business. So whether you're partnering to run it or whether you're running it yourself, being cognizant of your resource and your time, your energy to be able to run a separate business model. And in terms of other examples, I think that fit is a really good guide, not only with who you're working with, but also what you're trying to achieve. As Carlos was saying there, in terms of the why would you do some specific business. The space model helps you attract customers in one way, or an accelerator adds value to a space and serves those customers and helps with retention. But I've seen really good examples where a lead organization in the ecosystem positions itself well by running, say, a conference. And that conference it becomes an annual gathering or something that not only involves its customers, but its stakeholders as well, or provides some other value between stakeholders and ecosystem players and what have you, and it becomes a space. Now, so running a conference is very, very, very typical thing that people do, but it can also be a huge distraction if your job is to run accelerators or your job is to sell learning programs or whatever it might be. Running another event, I think we all have run events before, and they just take up team and all that kind of thing. So if you are going to run an event, be super clear on how it fits with other things in the ecosystem. And again, it's a different business. You're then into ticketing and selling tickets or getting sponsors for that one event, not necessarily achieving your other aim. So being careful. Whereas, say, running maybe slightly different services like business support service or what have you, that might be more procured perhaps, or you might be able to sell that to a customer in a more conventional way, rather than having to run an event once a year that only makes or only just covers its costs, but doesn't actually give you a product that can really contribute to your profit margins and your bottom line, although it might be strategically significant. So again, that's another lens. Is it strategically significant and therefore okay to do, but not really part of your actual business model? Worth thinking about. Has anybody else got any other examples of other mix and match business models in this space? Agni or Farah, I don't know if you want to contribute anything at this point on that. From the train, on the way to Bandung. Yeah, all good. But the main point being fit. Absolutely strategic fit and everything else, and hiring for those different businesses if you are blending it. Have you seen any super successful blends, Junaid, on your travels between places?
So I think one thing definitely that Carlos mentioned, that there are so many permutation combinations out there of the crowd that comes in. So not necessarily the different models, but definitely want to comment on that. So there's definitely that SME plus the whole model of the innovation-led startups. But then one of the things I've been coming across more so in the tech space is especially people are trying to bootstrap more of within the startup having the innovation side of things, where they're developing a product and then they are trying to sustain with some kind of services as well. So not necessarily a comment on the different business models, but definitely a lot of considerations in terms of the fit. and the co-working space fit and that was one question I was thinking about, that's a very qualitative area, right, in terms of getting that vibe, whether one space, on paper might look exactly the same, or some might look better than the others.
Yeah.
But so when I was thinking about it when I was talking about that one of the co-founders that we have, her co-working space is relatively new, and it's although it's a year or so old, but in terms of the vibe that you get in terms of having visited that space, the people and general energy and enthusiasm is very different from one of the other ones that is out in Colombo, which is a very government funded run thing. But if you were to just assess it based on the Facebook group or whatever images out there, you will feel differently, right? And that's one of the things I was thinking about when you're scaling. The qualitative aspect, the more of things that are intuitive, kind of a gut, kind of a feel. In scale, it's difficult to put that scale on gut, right? How do you make it more of a quantifiable, more objective assessment? And I was curious, how can one go about with that? Because the fit is definitely important. You might have a very good startup that wants to be part of your cohort, but the place has a vibe that they don't want to be associated with, right? So when you're scaling, especially going as an outside person, there are certain things which you if you're in the ecosystem, you have that feel and vibe. So you can look at the data in terms of the finances and a lot of other things, totally pretty standard, qualitative, objective data. But when it gets subjective and qualitative, how do you scale there?
Yeah,
so that was one thing I was thinking about.
It's I think you've really nailed a really important issue, that vibe and subjective feel. In Reid Hoffman's Blitzscaling book, he talks about those different stages of scale and how each one is so different, and the role of the founder changes, the managing of growing teams, that resourcing question changes, the dynamic and feel of the organization changes at each stage, and you can't design for stage 5 at stage 1. You are building it as you go, and you're adapting the culture and how it feels to be part of each scale of an organization. And not saying that we all have to blitz scale at all, but some of the principles involved in that are very, very coherent and very useful for as we're growing our organizations. And looking after that organizational culture, I think going back to a lot of our stuff in these earlier webinars, some people might think, oh, you're talking about values and so on, that's pretty basic. But actually having your values articulated really well and understood and talked about and on the wall and shared means that different people who are, say, responsible for hiring your next staff are hiring people that fit with those values, and they're bringing new people in. We often use a really quite involved hiring process where people are, it's quite devolved, the hiring process, for example, but we use the staff team. And again, our CEO is really keen that even when we're recruiting board members or senior staff, that the rest of the staff get involved in that recruitment exercise, and often our facilitators as well. So you get an awful lot of the team helping to do that selection, which can seem quite a lot, but it does help to maintain as you're growing and as you're spreading out. And that fit in finding a partner as well. In the last webinar, we were talking about partner profiles, and Carlos was going into that in quite a lot of detail. Really, really understanding, and it will only take you a couple of times finding the wrong partner fit in terms of creating that same vibe for you to realize you need something else into your partner profile that helps to refine the people who are representing your brand in that new area. And that starts to speak to some of Agnieszka's question as well. But I don't know, Carlos, do you want to come in again on anything that we're talking about there in terms of that scale?
Yeah, I mean, I don't know how to necessarily properly formulate the answer here, because it really is pretty complex. I think if I was to conceptualize myself and some of the things that I've seen, the numbers, right? Okay, so we have We have the perceptions and everything that's qualitative. I think the data will only tell us, like, by the time I think we need to realize that particular changes need to be made, it's probably already too late, you know, because it's definitely going to be more of like a lag indicator, you know, and I think for that reason, one of the things that would potentially be very interesting, and this is something that I'll have to look into and test myself here, but how can we actually start to like insulate ourselves from some of the negative sort of experimentation pieces that come from having to like test out some of these partners? And I don't want to say that every ecosystem is going to potentially give you the same type of result, but I think with region specific areas, you know, like parts of South Asia will look potentially similar, and that what happens in Colombo might be very similar to what might happen in another city of like similar size with particular demographics that reflect with maybe a certain level of like ecosystem sophistication. And you can use what potentially looks like a really like built out model that worked here to then just go test the assumption somewhere else. But because you factored in a lot of you know, knowledge from your previous experience, taking it to wherever you're going, you might not necessarily have to rely so much on the data that's coming in real time to start to say that, yeah, we can probably already like factor that these things will start turning the needle and then just go the other way. I'm not going to say that that's 100% true, but there's corners of the world where there's some similarities that could probably come up.
And this starts to bring us to Agni's question, I think. It's a good time to sort of shift onto that, really, which I think just to paraphrase, there were two sides to that, Agnia. You can keep me straight in a sec, maybe just reiterate it. But first was around sales tactics and prioritizing that market entry and some of that process for market entry. And I think some of these things that we're talking about here about fit and everything are really, really key with that. And I know you've got a city-based model focused on Indonesia. And then the second piece of that was then the difficulties of localizing what could be standardized content, but actually localizing it, and that resource challenge of finding good local practitioners or whoever it is to facilitate your stuff and to manage that well at scale. Those are the two sides of your question. Is that right? Do you want to add anything or just re-clarify at all? That was good enough? Great. Okay. Well, maybe if I chip in very quickly first, and then we can we'll open it out for other comment. Certainly, I think in terms of sales tactics, we've been talking, and I know that when I came over to Indonesia and worked with you guys, we looked at what was your product market fit, so the city level choice for licensing or sharing out your accelerator into different cities, and then looking at pace and what was your total addressable market. And I think William, being the entrepreneur, had about 100 cities in mind, and it was a question of how quickly could we enter all of those 100 cities. I think we got him back to 50 over 10 years or something like that. But certainly that scenario planning, I would encourage everybody to do a little bit of that. Really think about where could you possibly go. Think big over the next 10 years. Think about your different markets and those different sales, and project a few scenarios, a slow, medium, and fast at least. And then maybe have some tolerances in there that, you know, what if it went 25% faster or 25% slower? And what does that look like financially as well? So you're modeling out that pace and really thinking how many people is it going to take in your central team to manage that number of locations. And then regardless of what your long 5 or 10 year model looks like, as you say, you've got some testing to do and some market entry tests to run. And as you do that, you come across this kind of challenge that it's tricky to localize some standard content where you've got different educational levels, maybe different languages going on, all of that kind of thing. And so actually your original concept, it's hard to get that traction, which I think, again, in Carlos's slides, if you remember the graph that it goes really slowly along, and then finally you get traction, you get liftoff. And it's all of this testing. That's your A/B tests in lots of different places. Test one method in one and slightly different in another, and all the while hopefully selling and keeping it viable. But that's what that long, slow growth phase is all about. And I should say, in terms of that, the prioritization piece, again, there was the grid in the webinar there that just helps to start to maybe play with those post-it notes and see where they land on that effort versus reward axis, and which ones can you prioritize more quickly than others. Our board is constantly asking us, do you want to have lots of flags in the ground, just little toeholds of allowing lots of people to try it, or do you want to have just a few really quality tests and go slow and steady? And that's a constant challenge to us. And even though we've been going for 6 years in replication, we still get asked that. Very much our initial approach was to just get flags in the ground and respond to that demand, just because it gave us, that was where things were pulling us to, and it gave us the cash flow and the opportunity to test and to try. And I think in those early stage, cash really is king. Follow that. Don't be too wedded to your solid product and such that you're not selling anything. But being careful about that fit with your vision and your mission, that if you're being pulled too far off just to deliver a cash project, then you're not really testing anything. You're just making money. So prioritizing and having your own variables for your organization. Does it fit? Is there benefit and reward in terms of achieving your mission, achieving the change you want to see? And what's the effort required by your team? Are they on point? Are they really focused on delivering the same thing? So again, I think, I don't know if you can speak on the train or not, but your winning of that British Council contract and allowing you to test a few different locations with some backing as you're designing your licensed product, I think is a really great way for others to bounce off as a way of entering new markets and having some sort of resource to test. Is it a good chance to say something, or are you probably stuck because of the train? Stuck. Yeah, never mind. I can speak very briefly that the guys managed to win quite a major contract, and that's allowed them to really stabilize and to spend some time just refining the product, selecting 4 different locations to really go and to run that accelerator program, which is where I think you're saying the localization issues are coming up, and you're starting to learn from that. So again, in terms of scaling an accelerator, really good example. And I think she in Cambodia was the same. Winning a big contract or 2 can help you open up and turn on a few markets, test your product, and then see what's able to scale. So in terms of tactics, making sure you're on procurement portals, making sure you're on funder websites and portals and tuned into what opportunities are coming up so that you can win those big bids. Those will help to underpin your accelerators, even if it's on a different topic than you were initially set up for. You can still be accessing markets and refining your product mix. And I certainly know that making sure you're capturing those different products as you're building them, or as you're drawing on new resources, that's exactly what we've done over time. And you end up with a bank of hundreds of programs that you can bring in. But before we move on to the human resourcing side and the some of that sort of conversation, anybody else want to chip in on that sales tactics or prioritization stuff around market entry as well? Anybody read the growth hacking stuff at all? I want a conversation on that. Monetization of process. If you don't speak, I'm going to speak. Right, you better like my sound of my voice then. I'm going to say 2 minutes on some of that. I think the growth hacking stuff is fascinating because it's very much from the tech industry. It's very much from that sales industry where they're able to look at data quite clearly and hack into that data and say, right, what's going on with people's usage of our website or what have you. But that process of bringing your team together and checking what's going on, actually checking what's going on, ideating new ideas, problem solving, and putting them into action very rapidly, to see what you can do at each stage of that customer journey to reduce friction, to ensure that customer is buying in, or staying with you, enhancing your customer retention. If you have got, if you're bringing more water into your bath, but your plug is out and you're just losing water at the same time, you're never really filling your bath, right? So that's a very typical kind of metaphor for member retention and customer retention. And that repeat business can be so good for your long-term survival. So attending both that customer journey on the way into your organization, and then how you're holding those customers and understanding that customer journey, and having a team that's talking about, from the slides there, those sort of 4 R's of membership. You've got the recruitment side, which is recruitment and reactivation. That's bringing in new customers. And then you've got the relationship side, which is about retention and renewal, keeping them bought in and retained as part of your culture, and renewal of getting them to re-up either a subscription or a purchase, that kind of thing. Whether it's a member or a customer or a network of facilitators or your alumni and what have you, really attending to that makes sure that your sales are then growing. So in terms of sales, both on the way in and keeping them there, applying some of those growth hacking tactics makes you very, very aware of that sales process and those sales tactics you're using at each point. And in growth hacking, it's all very much about money. So it's all about monetizing. So at what point, how much can your customer afford to pay on the way into your process? At what point? Is that a barrier to their entry, or is it a really important hurdle that they put some money down to feel bought in and to actually value the process? And there is no one standard method for that. I know for us, in the franchising literature, often the franchisee or licensee has to pay an initial deposit to secure the rights for their territory. Usually, say in my context, it's around £3,000 to secure the rights. And for that 3,000, they get training, they get an introduction, and a whole host of stuff, and the rights to take on the later development of that franchise. If they choose not to do it, then they may get some of that deposit back. But it's a mutual time to suss each other out, and you're not overly committed too quickly to one partner, so you both are able to exit the relationship as well. So it's like a phase one. But actually, there's a phase before that, which is your market scoping of looking for the partner or offering the opportunity. So again, in terms of sales process, if you say, for example, Agnia, if you're opening up in a new city, you can either go public, go wide, and shout about the fact that you're looking for a new partner and advertise for that and see who comes your way. Or you can be very selective and see if you have any other contacts in the area and get pointed in the right direction and almost do it under the radar, so people don't know that you're doing it, and it's a bit more selective. So there's 2 different approaches, again, to A/B test, maybe in 2 different locations. And I think William came up with an idea of doing a bigger conference to invite a lot of people to multiple areas and do a big selection assessment at the same time. And that's a cracking idea. I don't know if you're going to do it or not, but that's something that, again, super efficient. You could have people representing you all over the place if you don't mind, and if you are able to, say, have a smaller window of testing, say 2 or 3 months, where you have always that power of veto. But resourcing that is a different equation as well. So a few different options for entering new markets. And I think playing with these sales pipelines is really, really key, so that we've got good deal flow coming, and that we're able to quickly take decisions and judgments about which is the right customer that we can actually scale, or which are the ones that can really just be slow and steady and in the background. But enough of my voice. Anybody want to disagree or add to that, or violently agree or back me up? Any other thoughts on those?
100% in agreement. And if there's an implicit mission in the work that's being done, where the acceleration program will focus on, either because of relationships with government or with donors, to where economic development becomes a key part of having to render services to the ecosystem, then beyond the deal flow that comes from generating revenue or participation in particular programs. Again, one of the lagging trends that we'll also have to start looking at is job creation. And this is another one of those points where trying to scale opportunities for the entrepreneurs to then be able to generate X amount of jobs, or how can we start to architect opportunities where these types of things become possible. I have seen recently where that has become a bigger push, especially from some of the donors, is to start looking a lot and heavily at like job generation. Now, the way that we look and how we have to render services to bring those types of things to reality means that we might actually not see a particular effect on something within 6 months to a year. And that this is something that might take 2, 3, 4 years in order to actually like come to fruition. Meaning that scale is slow out of the gate and might not actually show any type of positive data trends for quite a while. But again, I think it's staying true to your model and knowing some of the underlying reasons why you've chosen a particular track is interesting. So if I just go back to the deck that I was talking about, or that I was showing before, there's the chart of seeing the growth, right? From, it takes time to grow. One of the quick little growth hack here in order to get to where you need to, if you start to focus on medium-sized companies, when you're focusing on MSMEs, they're already in the market for 3 to 5 years already, and are probably only built out over a particular city or maybe a small part of a country. But when we're looking to grow and scale, this becomes one of those opportunities for us to really like dig in with our ability to like help optimize, and that becomes like a huge way for us to add value, to start hitting economic development marks. Sweet spots are later stage small companies and medium stage companies, as I have seen lately. Huge opportunity to look at.
Yeah, nice. The ability to pay, hey, comes with scale. Yeah, absolutely. Good advice, mate. Excellent. Very good. Right, and with the last few minutes, just moving on as well into the human resource factor as well of scaling, and the that being the hardest challenge, I think you said, Agnia. I think you're absolutely right. And the quality control and testing of localization of what it is you do if you are entering new markets and scaling up. And certainly quality control in that whole conversation is absolutely key. And that's very much going to be covered in the next webinar. So nicely done in setting up some of the content for next time. And so Farah as well, I think in what you were raising earlier on, it's the same thing. It's maximizing organizational resource and making sure that resource is working together really well. Is different at every different stage of scale. And again, we'll be covering that in the next webinar. But again, in blitz scaling, it's making that point that going from sort of family level, where you've got 1 to 7 employees, moving that up slightly to your tribe, going into the tens, to the village, from tens to hundreds, up to a city, from hundreds to thousands, and then to a nation at over 10,000 employees. That's that sort of blitz scaling journey. And at each stage of that, you've got something different going on. So for most of us, we're back down at that initial, going from 1 to 4, 1 to 7 employees, up to, or facilitators or a network, up into the, from the family to the tribe. So we're going to tens and we're moving up to 20s of people. That stage for us in Scotland, that lasted probably about 6 years, 7 years, staying at that sort of level, just in that 20. So just to manage expectations, if you're scaling faster than that and you're licensing out, so for us in the last 6 years, that licensing process has meant we've each year taken on between 2 and 4 new licensees, and with each new licensee comes 2 to 3 staff who might be working part-time on your gig, and they've got to recruit facilitators locally. So what we used to do was we would then go and train a batch of 20 facilitators, in each location. And of those 20, we might pick, say, 10 to 12. And so one of the lessons we learned in doing that was that, yes, that's the kind of the resource you need. But if your business development isn't going at the same pace, it's very much a chicken and egg. You're training all these people, but you haven't got the business development fast enough. So you've got all these people that then aren't doing something. So they become disaffected, or they aren't engaged. They haven't got enough to do. And so you're not actually training them and bringing them into your culture quick enough. So as you're describing, that management of the human resource, you're maybe setting high expectations and energizing people with a big kickoff, but then there isn't the traction, or there isn't the product generation or the accelerators for them to all work on. So what we're moving to is a smaller, more gradual kickoff for the facilitators, and only having 3 to 4 initially, making sure we get really good quality ones in that first instance. So we have lead tutors who can then cascade the knowledge and the scale locally as we grow. So again, sort of fast but slow, counterintuitively, putting your stakes in the ground, letting people get going on the business development front, and curating what they need, and also looking at your content and how to localize it, but with a smaller team rather than too big too quickly. And I think there's a lot of in both in blitzscaling and in growth hacking around flame out. So going too quickly can mean that you're just landing into a market that is not ready for you, and you end up just flaming out, losing all your energy, losing the buy-in of the people that you've brought with you, and then you'll be done within a year or 2 years, maybe 3, if you've built good relationships. So how we curate the ecosystem development at the right pace is based on each ecosystem in many ways. And so that means that you're going to have possibly slightly varying pace in each location. And I've got more to say on the human resource management and quality control, but does anybody want to jump in at that point on that sort of pace versus recruitment and management of your team kind of topic? Any experiences of that, either as part of a team watching it flame out, or not motivating you enough, or maybe you've tried to manage a similar situation? Or have you seen it in other ecosystems you've worked in?
We've had to walk the edge. You know, that was a tough one for us. Working on a particular project where we were in a pretty new ecosystem, relatively underdeveloped, and I guess, Sam, to your point, I felt like the movie was playing in my head about exactly what I saw, because we saw the foundations of what really was going to be a flame out. You know, very well funded. It was going to be, working with a team that had roughly around like 15 or 20 people on it already, looking to go and, break into the city with a bang, space plus programs, this, that, and the other. But, having to go back and say, you cannot do everything at once, and don't even try, because no one has the capacity, to be able to even take care of one of the things that they wanted to do, which was managing spaces, executing programs, this, that, and the other. I think one of the big assets that we're able to do as planners, and this will go for anybody else here too, once you have the experience of working in one ecosystem, is being able to understand, and this is a topic that Sam and I had discussed before too, is replication. How many times can we get somebody on our team to be able to understand or master a vast majority of the roles and processes in a particular way, so that we can then train the next person just as effectively to be able to do that. If I had 10 Sams on a team, that's better than having, 20 people, right? That are just focused on one topic, if he knows all of them, so like being able to lean out in that way actually will help you go quicker, because you're just way more agile anyway. But yeah, we definitely had to work with somebody to tell them, you guys should definitely focus more on like trying to like replicate a lot of the processes to be able to support each other as you're going in, to a new initiative than, you know, just shotgun blast the whole thing and, you know, whatever falls is what we collect. No.
Yeah, nice. That's it. I think it's making sure that people that are on your team are exposed to your culture, as we were talking about earlier, your values, all of those things that ground them in the methodology or the fit with what you're doing, but then also the very practicalities of how do you do this, and this, the 5 different things that add value in your model, or how they actually deliver your model. Making sure that the team is across those different elements makes sure you've got a good agile team able to do your model in different locations. But that means that you need to get clear on your value chain, which is going to come up in the next webinar. Absolutely. So do tune in for that, on that resource management piece, most definitely. There'll be lots more content on it. And that localization issue as well, again, that's a lovely balance to be aware of in the whole team, where you've got standardization and fixed content versus what's localizable. And we've become very clear that often when you're replicating, it's freedom within structure is a very much a model that we use a lot. So creating templates that can be adapted locally means that they haven't got to start from scratch or reinvent something, but they've got permission to change language, to change how something's framed, to just adapt stuff way more quickly. And you're adding efficiency to those local areas, but without being too fixed. So that's a really key concept in replication or scaling, is where can you keep some sort of standardization, but allow for those little tweaks that allow something to actually genuinely be localized and be relevant to the people who are on the ground in that place. So definitely something to pay attention to is, which bits of your model, be it your planning tools or be it your promotional materials or your content, what are the frames you can share and what's then localizable, so that it's very recognizable as your organization. But we'll be coming up on this in the next webinar. Farah, I don't know if you've got any other questions at this point. We're coming into the last couple of minutes of the seminar, but is there anything that you or anybody would like to raise, or some of the things we've been talking about so far? Any further questions, or would you like us to go into a little bit more detail, or will that do for now? Yeah, great. So from Farah, I think human resource management is a great piece, really fits into well about resource maximization. Yeah, absolutely right. It's the underestimated part of it is looking after our teams, isn't it? So going into more detail about hiring, training well as having good human resources, very, very important for the next session. Absolutely right. Great. So thank you, Farah. We shall definitely include that in the webinar, which we'll post later this week. Yeah, you've nailed it. No worries. We'll go into some different training topics and methodologies for that. And again, all of that really links to those. Just to reiterate, I think Agnia, you'd raised about that, so the process or those tactics of entering a new market. One of the things I'd just like to reiterate is make sure you've got stages well articulated for how you enter that market. So your team talks about identifying the market and partner, that sort of stage 1, is it viable to go in? Stage 2, explore it, test it, see what's there, see who's there. Can you find a partner quickly, not enter into too long an agreement, but do some initial agreement that sets up a period of time. Stage 3, put that little bit more effort in or investment into that partner, open up some resource, let them test and try, and you've suddenly got people that are working for you to do business development and start to refine potential people in that team. Stage 5, hopefully a bit more money coming in that the partner has secured, do more training, help them train up their team and grow their team steadily, and to grow that, and hopefully be testing some of your products, maybe just 1 or 2 in that market to see if you've got some traction and how much localization you might want to have to do. But each of those stages, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, you can define your own topics and how much energy are you putting in at each point, and how much is it costing the local people, or how much funding do you need to open up that market. Being really clear about that process of market entry is really, really key, and how many different sides to that you want to consider. is completely down to your licensing model or to your business development model and sales funnel. So just as a key point to end on, once we're really clear about those frames, then everything else links to that. Human resources, training, opening up our systems, our sales calculations of how much we can actually make. And if we've got a couple of different business models in play, as back to your original point, Junaid, you've got that double. You've got a couple of, if you're replicating and scaling and you've got two different sides to your business model, you're doing that twice. So it can be very, very tricky if it's a reliant on that. Anyway, that's right. That's us coming to the end of our hour. Thank you all for paying so much attention. Anybody, should we do a quick whip round of everybody just add one comment or the thing that's they're going to walk away from this webinar or seminar with that they might actually use or that's been most useful to them? Who'd like to start? Junaid, you're burning to talk.
Yeah, so one thing that I kind of noted when I was watching the YouTube video, some of the graphical part is really helpful, I think. You know, how you have that whole pace kind of a scale and all of that. Obviously, it requires more due diligence post that, but I think as a very preliminary kind of assessment tool, you know, that kind of, you know, straight out, you can kind of like, you know, eliminate some of those people based on just like a very rudimentary kind of a look at it. So that was one comment I think I wanted to make, that especially if you can have more of those kind of tools, like, you know, catered towards this as like more of an assessment tool.
Yep.
Because a lot of times the starting point becomes a bit of a challenge, right? Because there's so many moving parts, like, you know, this kind of like who's your, like, you know, customer, what kind of, like, you know, mix and match of what all it can be. So if there is some, almost looking at it like a graphical algorithm in a way, that, you know, more of like those decision tree kind of a thing, that, okay, does this meet this is requirement kind of, or however it is, it just kind of simplifies, you know, that. So that was kind of interesting to see. It like, you know, a lot of time visual representation sometimes oversimplifies things, but at that very basic level, it can give you a good insight. Okay, this is a complete no-go just because of, you know, it falls really on that part of the scale.
Yes.
So yeah, that was good, helpful.
Nice one. No, thanks, Junaid. Excellent. Yes, it's always useful, especially to get the team together and just to see and check very visually on those sorts of things. Where are we, and are we going in the right direction? Keep it simple. That's good. Something from Farah there, just on the. Yeah. Sorry, go. Farah had commented on quality control, resource management being less glamorous than fundraising and growth hacking, but one that should be prioritized during scale up. Really important point. Absolutely. Thank you, Farah. And that's very much for next time on the webinar. And plus, we're doing a couple of case studies to add as well. And Claire Wilson from our Global Learning Lab is going to be doing something exactly on that point as well. Yeah. So thank you for that. Anybody else?
I want to add one thing. Yeah, the highlight from this session is about the economic development. I also agree with Carlos' point that if we can tap into the job creation issue, then we can also join the government's program. Then maybe we can create a partnership with governments, especially in Indonesia, so we can attract more donors and also get the funding support from the governments. And also, we have to work on the partners assessment tools, and also, yeah, how to really prioritize and what's the key point or what's the criteria for selecting the local partner. So we have to really be selective on selecting local partner, either to open up the information or we select them by ourselves. That's the key highlight for me from this session. Thank you all.
Nice one. Thank you, Agnia. Magic. Great stuff. And Carlos, closing word. Any observations from what you've heard of what folks are dealing with or thinking?
I mean, it opens up a lot of doors, obviously on our end, to recognize that there's always a different wrinkle, that we need to look at. And mine here in particular, my takeaway, and I do a lot of work with content and curriculum building, and localization will always be, the challenge that we're trying to solve, and say that there's like a cure-all. And I think that what Agnia had brought to the forefront of the model and the example just brings up, I think, the importance once again for me, because I think in a time when we're trying to do a lot of standardizations and try to have that nice fit for everybody, the personalized touch, the localized touch becomes so important again, I think, to really like develop credibility in the ecosystem more than anything. And that piece does definitely create the future sustainability as well, at least a foundation block, because we're working from a place of trust and partnership and collaboration too. But how to get there consistently is the tough part. I recognize that. Every case is different. So.
Yeah, well said. Great. And on that note, we can wish you all a good week. I hope you kick some goals this week, and look out for the next webinar when we'll keep up this topic of growing well and managing our resources and bringing the right team with us and so on. So yeah, thank you all for contributing this week. Really appreciate it. And good luck out there, and we'll catch you next week.